Well, it's finally happening. We are only a week or so away from the Western release of Since Memories Off the Starry Sky, the first time a game in the Memories Off series has been translated into English, officially or not. And as the only weirdo on this side of this platform who has gone through all the mainline Memories Off games, I thought I could share my thoughts on this latest entry in the series. I originally played it back when it was released in Japan, but to put it simply, it fell short of my expectations. However, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was perhaps a bit too harsh on it. So for this video, I decided to revisit it once again and see if my opinions on it have changed or not, as well as give you some clues as to what to expect from this game. I guess you could consider this a review, but unlike the other ones I've done so far in the channel, this video will have a slightly different structure. Before diving into the game itself, I feel that I should set the stage and explain what exactly Memoff is and where Since Memories fits into it. Memories Off is a series of visual novels that began in 1999, back when the medium was starting to shape into what we know today. You might have heard of its developer Kid, since they were responsible for the Infinity series. As such, there's a bit of crossover staff between the two. While Memories Off wasn't as big as other visual novels from studios like Key or Type Moon, it was popular enough to receive games on a nearly yearly basis. However, around 2006, Kid filed for bankruptcy, upon which the series was taken over by Mages. After the 7th entry, Yubikiri no Kyoku, and its fan disc, the series effectively went on a brief hiatus until 7 years later in 2018, when Innocent Philly, the supposedly final entry in the series, and later on its fan disc, were released. And that was basically going to be the end of the Memories Off series. That is, until Mages changed its mind and decided to soft reboot it with Since Memories, which would also become a new series in and of itself. That is, until Mages changed its mind once again and decided to scrap that idea and continue making main entries in the Memories Off series with the upcoming release of So-So, Not Always True. To be honest, even I'm not sure what Since Memories is supposed to be anymore. Lore-wise, it technically takes place 10 years after the events of Innocent Phil, and it has enough ties with the main series to be considered a regular entry, but I guess it all depends on what they do with So-So. That brings up the question, can you play this game without having played the previous entries in the series? The short answer is a somewhat indecisive yes. If you ask me, the best entry point into the series will always be the first game. But with it remaining untranslated, I know this isn't a possibility for most. Regarding the continuity of the series, in reality, each entry is largely a standalone story, only connected to the previous games through character cameos and the setting itself. On the other hand, this is also what makes the series so good. The sense of world building feels very consistent while also being subtle and non-intrusive. Furthermore, the returning characters aren't just there for a scene or two, but instead they play significant roles within the new stories. Out of all of them, however, it is important to mention one character who has appeared in every single game, Shin. In the first game, he was the protagonist's closest friend, but with each new entry, he essentially became the voice of reason who would help out each protagonist through their struggles. Seeing Shin grow as a character across the series was also incredibly satisfying, and in my opinion, cemented him as one of the best supporting characters in any visual novel series. As far as Since Memories, the only main cameo is indeed Shin. There are obviously other nods to the series, such as the locations the characters visit, as well as some tracks from the soundtrack that are essentially remixes of previous games' themes. That said, there are actually other not-so-obvious references in the OST. For example, listen to this fragment of the track Back to Memories from Since Memories. Now take a listen to this part of Screen Whiz U from Memories Off 5. If you didn't catch it, let me show you what I mean by combining the two with the power of audio editing. These two tracks share the same key, the same tempo, and have similar thematic ideas. I'm sure if I were to analyze the rest of Since Memories' soundtrack, I could also find other references, but you get the idea. Needless to say, not catching these winks towards longtime fans isn't that big of a deal. The issue is that the game goes beyond these subtle nods. There's unfortunately one character whose entire existence basically spoils what is, in my opinion, the best moment in the series so far. But it doesn't stop there. There are also some scenes where Shin reminisces on his past, essentially spoiling some plot events of previous entries as well. Additionally, there are times when characters from previous entries are mentioned during conversations, which I think might confuse new players. That's sort of the issue with this game. I feel like it can't decide whether it wants to be a completely standalone experience or remain closely tied to the series. At any rate, the relevance of these spoilery callbacks depends entirely on whether you intend to eventually play the rest of the series or not. Since Memories has a perfectly self-contained narrative, and if I'm being honest, I don't see the earlier entries being translated anytime soon. So it's entirely up to you whether you think it's a good idea or not to dive into this one first. I guess it's about time we start discussing the actual game. The story follows Junya, a college student struggling to move on after his brother's tragic death in a car accident a year ago. He's often haunted by visions of his death, recurring in dreams that torment him. One day, a mysterious young girl confronts him, accusing him of being responsible for the accident. This is mostly a story with two focuses: character development and the mystery regarding the death of Junya's brother. So, let's talk about both. Notice how I said character development and not romance. This is because this game doesn't particularly lean in that direction. It's true that in some routes, not all of them, the characters move into that sort of relationship, but the main focus remains on their personal growth. As such, this was a visual novel that lived or died by its cast, and it's here where the game lost me when I initially played it. You see, it's clear that the game aims for a complex cast with distinct personalities and intriguing inner conflicts. And while it somewhat succeeds in that, I can't say I deeply cared for them. In retrospect, I can see that this was largely due to their treatment of the protagonist during the common route. It often felt like they were either taking advantage of him, even going as far as being manipulative, or went to the opposite extreme and berated him for no good reason. On this second playthrough, I was able to appreciate their character portrayals a bit more, since these led to actually interesting clashes of personal values between them. But for the most part, I still don't think this is a particularly strong lineup of characters. I will say, however, that this time I could better connect with Azusa's presence in the story. She's the character that showed the most believable character growth, despite starting rather hostile towards the protagonist. Her route, alongside Chihiya's, focused on the mystery surrounding the death of Junya's brother. This is more or less how the game structures its plot, by pairing two characters into storylines that follow similar goals. Chihiya, on the other hand, was initially a character I found hard to like due to her personal disposition. It was only around the last stretch of her route when I started to root for her. I would and perhaps should criticize her for being a bland character, but in a way that was sort of the point. At the same time, I think that the evolution of Chihiya and Azusa's relationship was quite convincing and gratifying, with some scenes showing how their mutual trust developed. I must admit, though, that I found it kind of amusing that Chihiya's storyline essentially had an NTR premise, given that she already had a fiancé when the plot started. As far as the mystery aspect of their roots, this was another part that I thought was slightly better than what I remembered, even if it wasn't exactly intricate. However, I got the feeling that the two routes shared too many plot elements. While it's understandable that these two storylines shared the same end goal, I had hoped they would take more distinct approaches to reaching it. The other side of the story revolves around Chunyun and Yuriko. Among the two, I found Chunyun to be the most likable. She was very upbeat while also having a strong sense of justice, which occasionally led to arguments between the characters. While these were at times slightly melodramatic, I thought her frankness was a nice breath of fresh air. I definitively welcomed having at least someone who would point out the selfishness and lack of self-awareness some of the characters would show. Her route, on the other hand, was a bit of a disappointment. The game initially hinted at a focus on a different mystery, but to me it felt that her storyline eventually derailed into a secondary route for Yuriko, making that mystery aspect something far too superficial. Speaking of which, Yuriko was yet another character that didn't really click with me due to her constant lying and generally egoistic attitude. I know this is not entirely the game's fault, but I couldn't help but draw comparisons to Hotaru from Memories Off Second. Both characters struggled with their musical pursuits, but this whole aspect of Yuriko's storyline was very poorly handled, in my opinion. That said, I did enjoy the climax of her route. And finally, there's Hinata. Oh boy, Hinata. Imagine if you took an angry chihuahua and turned it into a big titty anime girl. That's Hinata in a nutshell. She's Chihaya's personal assistant, being present in most of her scenes. But she struck me as such an unpleasant character. She was constantly nagging, making dumb decisions, and simply being a disingenuous human being. Her route was also quite detached from the rest, which is not intrinsically a bad thing, but just makes her addition as a main heroine all the more puzzling. I know that, so far, I've been fairly critical of the characters of this VN, but it's not like it doesn't have some likable ones as well. It's just that they were all relegated to secondary roles. To me, the biggest crime was depriving Aino, Junya's sister's close friend, of her own route. She was literally the only girl who actively tried to support and defend Junya, showing clear feelings of affection towards him. Yet in the game, she was often treated as the butt of the joke. This was made more frustrating by the thick-headed nature of the protagonist. It's honestly absurd that they thought it was a good idea to not give Aino her own route. Another thing I noticed this time was that some scenes felt they dragged on for just a tad too long, mostly due to constant flashback interruptions and characters taking overly long to get to the point. It's possible that I felt this way due to me already knowing what the story was about, but I do remember that the first time I played it, the game struck me for its dullness, of which this could be the cause. On the other hand, there's little to fault in terms of its presentation. It's clear that the game was put together with a great deal of care, largely thanks to the art style, which even if I'm not entirely sold on the actual character designs, it's hard to deny its high quality. The audio department is also excellent. I already mentioned that the music is fantastic, but it bears repeating. I particularly like the different variations some tracks had to suit different moods. It's honestly incredible how much the music manages to carry some scenes. Takeshi Abo really never misses. The voice acting is also top-notch, including the performances of the side characters. Although I feel like it's a bit of a shame that Junya is only partially voiced. Also, the sound design for the menus was nearly ASMR material. Great stuff all around. Regarding the translation, as you can see, I'm simply reviewing the game using my Japanese copy, so I don't have access to the final translation. While I don't think it should be too much of a challenge, there are some parts that slightly concern me, especially considering that, from what I've heard, it seems that lately PQube's translations have been rather iffy. Firstly, in its original language, Chunyun spoke using slightly tilted Japanese to somewhat convey her Chinese origin. I wonder if they will change her lines to avoid the possibility of a racially insensitive portrayal. There's also a couple of aspects of the mystery that rely on word puzzles. I'm kind of curious to see if they will rewrite them or keep them intact with added translator notes. At any rate, I wouldn't worry too much, unless they massively screw up or something, I guess. In conclusion, there's undeniably some of that Memories Off DNA in Since Memories, blending psychological struggles within a mystery-oriented narrative framework. The character exploration that defines the series is still there, but the cast itself isn't appealing enough for it to be compelling, making the struggles feel melodramatic rather than relatable. The mystery aspect, while not without its surprises, often feels contrived and treated with not that much care, especially when compared to previous entries. In a way, despite being a soft reboot, it suffers from its connection to the Memories Off series, where much of what this game was striving for had already been achieved and done better. As far as the score, back when I played it, I gave it a 5.5, and while perhaps that was a bit too harsh, I still don't think I would bump it up beyond a 6 or a 6.5 at most. I do, however, get the feeling it's going to be well received once reviews begin to pop up, mostly due to media outlets tending to be overly fixated on high production values. As I mentioned, I feel like some of its stronger aspects were better than I remembered, but I simply can't bring myself to rate this entry highly within the series. At any rate, that's going to be it for the review/rant about this game. There's part of me that wants this game to do well in the West, but at the same time, I have my doubts that this will make mages consider translating the earlier entries. Maybe there's a chance with so-so, not always true, but it's still unlikable. At the very least, I hope this means that more people will pay attention to the Memories Off series. Who knows, maybe in the future there might be an initiative to fan translate stuff like the original or second. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Marin out.